Hey, if you're a journalist who uses the tool Help a Reporter Out, or Harrow, listen up. Harrow is moving to Cision's new app, Connectively. But what is Connectively? Well, imagine a place where you can quickly connect with expert sources for your next story. Connectively is a new app from Cision that's changing the way journalists, like us, content creators, experts and PRs work together. So if you're in search of credible sources, Connectively is your next stop. With just a click, you can publish your queries. These go straight to a feed where experts from loads of different backgrounds can respond, giving you their expertise. So go on, visit connectively.us to sign up for free. That's connectively.us. Connectively.us.
Hello and welcome back to Series 14 of Freelancing for Journalists.
In this series, we are celebrating and learning more about our Freelance Journalism Award winners.
Yes, we're chatting with our winners to find out more about their fantastic work.
Yes, but before we get to this week's guests, we are going to have a chat about our win of the week. So, Emma, what's yours this week?
I've got quite a good one this week. I have not been working much because it's summer, and I also generally don't pitch much because I'm in such a niche that quite a lot of the editors that I work with just come to me with ideas. But there was a topic that was really bugging me and that kind of I couldn't stop thinking about related to vaccination. And so I pitched it as a news analysis, and they said, yeah, please, that's perfect timing. Can you do it this week? So I was just, really pleased that I've now got an outlet for this issue that's been really bugging me, and I wanted to do a deep dive. And it also means that I've not lost my pitching ability. So that's a benefit as well.
Yeah, there's always that feeling over the summer, isn't it? If you take some time off and then you go back to pitching and you're like, oh, do I know what I'm doing anymore? Is anyone going to commission me? So
exactly, yeah. Is anybody even out there at this point? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yes. And Lily, I know you had an actual win this week because you became first female in a 100k race, which was amazing. Do you also have a journalism win? I don't know that you need one at this point.
Well, I do have a journalism one. I'm in recovery at the moment, so I'm trying to take it nice and easy. But I have this summer been working on moving into my new office, which is very exciting. At the moment, my office is basically a corner of downstairs, and I don't have a door, which is really annoying because the whole family comes traipsing past all the time. So I'm moving into my spare room. I've been painting this summer. The new carpet was laid this morning. So today's job after this podcast is to start moving into my new office, which is very exciting. And then I can put my trophy from my win up on the shelf as well. So yes, that's my win of the week.
Exactly. I assume your productivity is going to go through the roof now you've got your own office and not just a corner of the hallway.
Yeah, hopefully. I've spoken to the kids about if the door's shut that they're not to come in, and they're not even allowed to knock. But if it's open, they can come in. I think we're going to need some kind of system, like if we're recording a podcast, I might have a on-air notice on the door or something. But yeah, hopefully. I think it'll be a bit of a pain in a way because there's always deliveries and stuff, and I'm going to have to keep traipsing downstairs. But just having my own space, I just think mentally it's going to be just nice having my own room. Yeah. It does double up as a spare room as well, but yeah, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. Right, it's time to introduce our guest. Today we have Liz Perkins, who won our award for Best Campaigning Journalist. This was a new award this year, sponsored by Paydesk. Our judges chose Liz's work covering the treatment of victims of abuse and children in the family courts because of its far-reaching implications. Liz is an experienced freelance journalist and editor based in Wales, who's worked across the national press. Currently, she works as night news editor for the Daily Express and Sunday Telegraph, and recent bylines include the Daily Mail as well as being a contributor to Times Radio and Talk TV.
Congratulations on the win, Liz. It's very exciting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's great. We have lots of questions for you about the campaign and how it all came about. But to start with, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your career so far, sort of how you got into journalism, and also a bit about your current kind of situation, how you juggle those news editing shifts with other work?
I was going to say, it's always a juggle, isn't it? Especially when you're trying to freelance here, there and everywhere. Initially, I wanted to become a journalist when I was 13, and my dream was to be a tennis writer, to be honest. And my house was always full of newspapers, and the TV news was always on, and there was really no escape from it. And I ended up going to do English literature at Kingston, and then did journalism at Cardiff, and also studied at Oxford quite recently and did executive organisational leadership there too. And basically, I just ended up at the South Wales Evening Post in Swansea doing general news, did health reporting, and then managed to fall into defence reporting because some of the health workers from South Wales ended up over in Afghanistan, and I went over there 6 times. So I've kind of done all sorts of everything from that to sports reporting, and ended up freelancing across the national press, from the Daily Star to the Sunday Mirror and, Sunday Times and Telegraph and Express, and just everywhere. I think it's probably easier if I said where I haven't been than where I have been. But it's just been really good fun. I mean, right now, as you said, obviously I'm sort of juggling news editing, and you do get really great stories coming along as well, because when you win awards, then obviously people want to work with you, and it's just trying to balance that as well. And when a big Welsh news story breaks, my day is turned absolutely upside down. So when, there was a stabbing at a school in Ammanford, you had Times Radio on the phone, and then LBC and Talk TV, and, Vaughan Gethin, the former First Minister of Wales, has been keeping me in business quite a lot lately because he's been very controversial, and people want to know absolutely everything as to how on earth he managed to stay in the job as long as he did. So there's always something happening, and it's just trying to, keep everything going, all the plates spinning at the same time. So yeah.
I mean, I think you take it up another notch, don't you, when you're kind of doing these big campaigns, as well as doing all these news shifts and kind of being the go-to person for Welsh stories. I mean, let's talk a bit about your award-winning entry. So this was for the End This Injustice campaign. And this is quite a lengthy bit of work you were involved with over a sort of sustained period of time, calling for an overhaul of the family court system. The final part of this, which was the bit that was part of your award submission, was the announcement that killers who murdered their partners would lose parental rights. So can you talk us through this campaign and how it actually led to a change in the law through the domestic abuse bill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, really, because I had this story just given to me by this MP called Tonya Antonyazi. And what it was, I was so surprised when I actually had this come through, because it was a woman who was going through a family court case, and her husband had been convicted for abusing both their children. And he live streamed their abuse across the world, and he was in jail for 15 years. So you'd think you would probably never hear from somebody like that ever again once that happened. However, he was managing to use the family court to stop his children from changing their surnames, from going on holiday, and even his ex-wife. He wanted to stop her from selling the property, even though he had abused both the children in that home. So it was just seemed to be somewhat ridiculous that in Britain we had a system that was allowing people like that to carry out such abuse in their, through prison and through the family court. It just seemed, really, really shocking. And I mentioned it to the deputy news editor of the Express, and he just couldn't believe it either. And he started just telling everybody about this story. And it was, he was telling the deputy editor, everybody got involved. And, 1 minute is on the news list, it's just part of it. The next minute it was on the front page as an, because it was exclusive. And the editor saw this and was just like, wow, there must be more to this, because it just seemed so extreme that you had this case And he started looking into it as well as I did. And Louise Haigh, now Transport Secretary, she was running a campaign around having this bill that would try and remove parental rights from rapists, because she had teamed up with Sammy Woodhouse, who, obviously was one of the victims of the Rotherham scandal. And, at that point in time, I thought, this is going to take me 6 years to be able to make any difference at all, because that's how long it would have taken to go through Parliament. But Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, she launched the domestic abuse bill. And when I was doing this campaign, I was absolutely inundated with emails and phone calls about it, and people coming forward and saying, look, there are so many cases, this is blighting my life, and whether you were in a straight or gay relationship, it was still impacting. And you just thought, wow, we've got to do something about this. And as time went on, I saw that the domestic abuse bill was almost like a vehicle, really, that you could get an impact with this campaign and you could make change. But it's obviously really difficult because, as you know, a journalist trying to change the law is, doesn't really happen that often. It can happen, as it did in my case, but, it's rare that it does.
Absolutely. And the journalism is one part of that. You can keep sharing the stories, you can keep providing examples and kind of trying to shine a light on, what families are having to deal with who are in this situation. But what other work did you have to do alongside the journalism to try and ensure those changes in the law were made? I assume you were kind of in conversation with MPs, etc. So what was the kind of other side of that?
I think you have to be acutely aware when you're running a campaign like that you can't simply focus in on one political party. You've almost got to have cross-party support from really, big name MPs, people in the House of Lords as well. Because, like you say, you do have these powerful stories, but yet you need to go a step further than that. And I think the way that Jess Phillips described the family court as like the Wild West, really, really hit home. You had Rachel Riley on Countdown, who described the situation in the family court as a national scandal. And she knew full well what the situation was, because her friend had, her former husband was threatening to set fire to the house and to kill her and all their children. And you're just thinking, when you've got people like that, like Sammy Woodhouse, like Rachel Williams, you've got MPs like Louise Haigh, Tonya Nanjiazi, you've got Caroline Harris, who is a bit of a campaign queen for Labour, as everybody knows, Baroness Newlove, who has been through her own trauma, but has taken that and become such a positive figure for so many people. She's obviously a victims commissioner now. You've got all these really significant people like Mel B even getting involved with the campaign, and everybody loves a Spice Girl, right? So it's just, you're making it understandable to people who didn't really go through the family court. I had no idea when I started this campaign how awful that system was, but it was only because I had all these letters and people saying, look, I'm having to flee Britain to keep my children safe. And we even had a situation where one woman ended up in prison alongside Rose West because she was just trying to simply give presents to her, children who she was estranged from. It just seemed utterly ridiculous that these kind of things were happening in this country. And, when you've got MPs shouting and screaming about it, it's no wonder that, after a year, the former Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, said, congratulations on your work in terms of shining a light on this issue. We are going to overhaul the family court, which you don't normally expect to happen, and to happen so early on. And you just think, look, if the government are on the ropes here and they are saying we are going to make change, you think, well, what else can I get? Where else can I, how else can I help people? And obviously non-fatal strangulation was an important issue, economic abuse and threats to share intimate images. They were all needed to be criminalised, and we campaigned for that. And they were as well in the domestic abuse bill. But you just think, well, what else can we do? How else can we take this forward? Because clearly there are still issues for people within our society, and you have to take them forward and make sure that they're always in the public eye. So even though you've achieved so much, there's always more to get right.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that because it sounds like this was quite an evolving story. So what kind of happened over the period of time? It sounds like everyone was shouting and screaming about this. You had the MPs and the celebrities, and you had lots of case studies. But kind of how did that evolve, and what was some of the challenges along the way?
I have to say the biggest challenge was getting into family court, because I remember in one case, I mean, obviously the one I referred to as kicking off this campaign, was that, the grandparents were trying to get in and see the children, even though they were sending them cards with little prisoners on it, because they blamed the kids for the fact that their father had ended up in prison, but yet wanted to see them, which just seemed almost bizarre. So basically they had this case and I ended up going to it, but ended up being turfed out, even though I did have a right to be there. And I think it's almost like this secrecy around the family court has not helped it at all. And I understand, on the one hand, you have to protect children who are at the heart of this. However, if the decisions are being made in there not protecting these kids, then surely you have to have people like me going into those courts. And I'm very pleased to see that you've got these pilot schemes now that are ensuring that journalists do go into these courts. And also, I mean, I had to take it up with our lawyers to say, look, this court is stopping me from being there when I actually have a right to do that. So I think things are starting to change, which is really, really important. And I don't think that any court should be shrouded in secrecy in the UK.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that kind of secrecy of family courts has, there's been various reporters trying to push back, freelance journalists as well, trying to push back against that for a really long period of time. So it's good to see that the projects are happening now for that to be more open and transparent. I mean, from a kind of news editor perspective, I suppose, what difference does it make? How do you make that decision of when a story is just going to be investigation or a really good front page lead, versus turning that into an actual campaign and kind of throwing the weight of the newspaper behind that? How does that kind of process sort of work?
I think instinctively when it's a really, really good story. And I'd never heard of a story like that before in our court system. So, when I went in that day to the Express, I knew I had something that was different, that people weren't necessarily talking about that specific case. It was exclusive, and you knew there had the potential to be on the front page. I think in that situation, I mean, obviously with the editor's decision, and Gary Jones is a real campaigner, to be honest. He loves these crusades and taking those issues forward. And I think the fact that there was, that bill in the background, the suggestion that something needed to be done, and it showed that there was validity to what we were about to do. I think the extent of it, we didn't realise initially, and I don't think you do. And when you start out, you don't think, I'm going to change the law. And the ironic thing is, I managed to change it for my sofa because obviously it was COVID when it all went through. But it's just, I guess it's a series of editorial decisions. I mean, I wish I could say, look, I'm in charge, I'm going to put this on the front page, but it's obviously an editorial choice, and it's got to be Gary who would be the one who would say, yes, we've got to drive this forward. But, a campaign like that, when you've got so many people speaking out and saying, look, this is really important that something is done, and, the scale of it was just so big that you just couldn't ignore it.
One thing I'm wondering about, if you're kind of working on all of this as a freelance, presumably there's a lot of background research, content that's not necessarily been published. How does that work in terms of your rate of pay? And, if you're normally getting paper stories, but you're working on a big campaign, how does that sort of financial bit work?
I've got to say, if it was a front page exclusive and it was double page spread as well, obviously you get paid really well for it, but then, it depends where it goes in the paper and what priority you had. Do you know what I mean? But it was kind of, how can I say this? On the one hand, I was juggling night news editing shifts, and on the other, I was juggling the stories as well. And you can imagine interviewing domestic abuse victims, that it's not an easy job. And they were often, when you're right up against deadline, they want to pull out, and they go, oh my gosh, somebody's going to recognize my story. And I think, that is the challenge. And obviously as a freelancer, you're trying to get those stories in because without those stories, change is not going to be made. And, obviously you're getting paid to do this work as well. But, the priority really is about making a difference in those times. But yeah, it's a real challenge trying to get it all done, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a skill in itself, isn't it? Convincing people to share their stories. I mean, these are kind of really difficult stories for those going through it. They probably, are at the end of their tether, but at the same time, they're conscious about bringing more trouble to their door or making their situation even more difficult. Kind of how difficult was it to persuade, people to talk to you and to go into detail about what happened to them?
I think it was I have to say they were really brave to speak out, because, you have to think that some people had their children killed by their partners. Some of them, were fighting to be reunited with their children. So speaking out sometimes goes against you. It doesn't always go for you. And, I had one woman who, she used to be like a nanny to different MPs and celebrities. And yet, even though she was okay to look after them, they took her child away and gave her child to her lesbian former partner, even though that person was abusing the child. It's just utterly extraordinary, the kind of things that were going on. So, yeah, it's kind of really interesting to see how people react to it. Originally, they speak to you and they're okay, and then they start thinking about things and thinking, oh, what's going to be the effect? Are they going to find me out? Are they going to know where I live? Are they going to identify me from this? And you have to take into account, we couldn't really share pictures of these people because obviously that's the nature of it. And more often than not, I mean, they're either subjected to violence or emotional abuse or economic abuse as well. So you can imagine, very talented women ended up in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debts because of their former partners. So it wasn't an easy thing to get people to speak out. But, you have to say, look, if you do this, then somebody else will speak and somebody else will speak and we can actually make a difference. And in the end, it turned out that we did make a difference. And now people go to these courts and they don't have to walk through the same door as their abuser. They are kept apart. There are screens in place. These judges can use barring orders. Things have changed. I mean, I wish, everything was perfect right now. And I know the wheels don't always move as fast as you want them to, but at least it's made an impact. And at least we've got journalists going into these courts and at least change is happening. And, you should never see domestic abuse victims suffer even more than they already have. And I think it's hugely important that, we have been able to make that difference.
And did you get any kind of backlash or confrontation from any of the abusers? If they kind of got wind of, you talking to their partners or potentially covering their cases?
Well, it's interesting that some people on X weren't very happy with me, as you can imagine. They didn't want me to change the law. They didn't want me to make things better. They didn't want to be able to not get away with what they had done before. And obviously these people use different names than who they are and try and hide behind that. I mean, I just simply blocked them. I didn't respond. I didn't see the point in responding because, why get into a war of words with these people? You're never going to win. So, but, obviously they felt threatened by what that I was doing. But you can't be intimidated by abusive people like that. You've got to keep going because you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for so many other people out there. And, you're making a difference to their lives at the end of the day. And you can't afford to lose sight of that. I mean, whether it's a man who's been abused or a woman, it doesn't matter. It's just like you've got to help these people because if, how many other people were were doing that at the time and they weren't. And it's just my stories were getting picked up by other nationals, and people in the past never used to want to talk about domestic abuse. Now they're talking about it. And you just think it's so important, isn't it? Just so, yeah, you've got to keep fighting even in the face of, other people's opposition, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, story that you reported on, you've got to think how many are out there that we don't know about or that kind of haven't spoken to a reporter. Before we round up today, I did want to ask you about another big story that you've worked on, which is uncovering sexism and misogyny in Welsh rugby. I mean, that the family court story and this are both about abuse of power and unfair treatment of women. Something you're kind of drawn to reporting on are these the kind of stories that you're most interested in, I suppose?
I think it's really important as a journalist to give a voice to the voiceless. And what I mean by that is half the time you see people who are homeless, you see people who are prostitutes, people just walk past them on the street, right? And they just don't want to know. I've done stories about prostitution and shone the light on that has been recognised with awards in the past. I just think that I'm really drawn to strong stories. And, if I'm able to help people through my work, then I think it's hugely important to do that, because more often than not, these people are not taken seriously. And when I was handed, that report about the Welsh Rugby Union, I knew it was like a stick of dynamite because, how can I say this? I mean, this woman was threatened with rape in a hotel room, and this guy said he wanted to rape her all afternoon, and she was compared to Hitler. I don't think anybody, whether you're a man or a woman, deserves to be treated in that way. And, it needed to be exposed, and obviously that story went around the world and people got to know about what was going on in Welsh rugby. I mean, women rugby players weren't getting the same meals as the men. It's just utterly ridiculous. And I mean, obviously I wrote a story about the fact that this woman was sexually assaulted in a cupboard at the Principality Stadium, one of the most famous rugby stadiums in the entire world. So, that kind of behaviour should not be accepted in 2024. And I don't think it ever should have been accepted, to be honest. So, these issues need to be, come to life. These stories need to be told. If I'm able to help women through the work I do, then obviously, I'm so pleased that I'm able to do that, because obviously these women are in situations that they are not able to help themselves. So for somebody like me to be able to come along and just go, right, I'm going to listen to your story, let's do something about this, I think is important. But, obviously I've been over to Afghanistan and I would always work with veterans because of what I've seen them go through when they were on the front line. I'll always, support people like that. But, I've also got a passion for tennis as well and sports journalism. And, I'm not one of these people who you can just, put in a specific box because, 1 minute I'm a political commentator at Times Radio and the next minute I'm interviewing Novak Djokovic at Wimbledon and talking to him about, the potential to make history. And obviously we saw him win the gold medal at the Olympics, which is, something else for a 37-year-old. But I think that you've just got to be open to different stories, which I always am. And, it just keeps life interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I guess is the joy of being freelance, is that you can, follow the stories that interest you. I mean, just one last question really, but what are you working on now? Is there a sort of big campaign or investigation? What can you or can't you tell us?
Oh, do you know something? I wish I could tell you all the stuff I'm doing at the moment. I'll say this, I'll hint at something, basically to do with the campaign and that I won the award for. I mean, I've got a story about, I can't go into the full details, but, basically certain families getting falsely accused. So, I mean, hopefully I'll be able to write something in the coming months. And right now I'm working on a book proposal. So, I mean, I've got to keep that all close to my chest, but I think it's probably fair to say that it's based on real life and based on crime, and that's all I'm able to say really. I can't really show too much, otherwise I'll probably get into trouble.
Exciting times, lots of big projects. It sounds like you're going to be just as busy as you ever were. I mean, you may have answered my next question with your last answer, but we're asking all our awards winners what would be their kind of bucket list freelance opportunity. So it might be a dream publication that you've not managed to get into yet, although it sounds like there aren't any that you haven't got into. Or a particular story you'd like to cover, or a person you'd like to interview, something else. So do you have like something that you've not ticked off that bucket list yet that you want to do?
Well, I'm still waiting to get on the Sky newspaper review. So if anybody's out there and would like to get me on there, that would be amazing. In all honesty, I mean, I've done quite a lot of broadcasting recently. So, you know, it would be nice to do a bit of freelancing, maybe for Sky or the BBC or ITV. I've done work for ITV News in Wales. So, yeah, that would be quite fun, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It's great that there's always things, you know, opportunities out there that you've got on your list. And it's, you know, you're never done as a freelancer.
No, never. There's always something you want to do, isn't there, Jeff?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, it's been so good to chat to you. Unfortunately, we need to bring this episode to a close now, but thanks so much, Liz, for coming on and chatting to us. It's been, you know, really fascinating to hear sort of behind the scenes about all the hard work you did on that amazing campaign. And it was a really well-deserved win. So, yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Cheers, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. It's been really, I always find it so fascinating to chat to freelance journalists because we're all so different in the type of work we do and how we approach things and the stories we do. And there's always things that you can kind of tips and things you can learn from each other. So yeah, it's great to do a deep dive into that. You can find all our resources at freelancingforjournalists.com. If you haven't already, come and find our Facebook group where there's like 8,300 members, I think, last time I checked in there now. It's growing every day.
Yep. And just a final note to say thanks to our producer, Maddie Drury, and a huge thank you to all of our Freelance Journalism Awards sponsors, which were not only Paydesk, but also Women in Journalism, NUJ Freelance Branch, Savanta, X-Tiles, Birmingham City University, and News Associates. And we will be back again next week with another award winner. But goodbye for now.
Bye.